In the last series, we stood at the foot of the Great Pyramid and stared into the silence of time. We saw that it was more than a tomb. It was a monument of precision, a beacon of mystery, a message carved in stone. We explored 5 theories that shattered conventional history, from energy machines to star maps, alien blueprints to codes embedded in geometry. And yet, for all the speculation, one truth became harder and harder to ignore. The ancient Egyptians may not have built all of it alone. Now, in this 3rd series, we turn away from stone and structure and look deeper into the hands, the minds, and the forces behind it all. Because if the pyramids were built with impossible knowledge, if the gods of Egypt were not just myths but memories, then who, or what, was truly behind this civilization? Who taught them how to align temples with the stars? Who guided their pharaohs, shaped their rituals, and encoded the cycles of time into every carving and corridor? We are taught that history is linear, that Egypt rose from the Nile through farming and faith, that it learned brick by brick how to become an empire. But what if that story is incomplete? What if Egypt was not the beginning, but a continuation? In ancient texts and temple inscriptions, we find whispers of those who came before the pharaohs. The Zep Tepi, the first time, a mythical era when gods walked the earth and ruled Egypt directly. A time before time, when the land was shaped by divine knowledge. Most historians dismiss Zep Tepi as legend. But the deeper you look, the more real it begins to feel. Who were these gods? Were they flesh and blood? Were they ancestors? Or were they something else? Because the stories speak of beings that came from the sky, with animal heads and human bodies, with power over life, death, and time. Osiris, the dying and resurrecting king. Isis, the mother magician. Thoth, the scribe who invented writing. Horus, born of a virgin, who defeats darkness with light. They weren't just stories. They were symbols. And maybe memories. In this new series, we dive into 5 hidden forces, some spiritual, some cosmic, some forbidden, that may have shaped Egypt behind the scenes. Forces that still leave traces today, in temples, in texts, in energy that can still be felt beneath the sand. Because perhaps the greatest mystery of Egypt is not how it was built, but who Egypt was built for. This is not a journey through stone, but through spirit. Not through engineering, but through influence. We will follow the signs left behind by the shadow architects of history. In Part 1, we begin with the most ancient of claims, buried deep beneath even Egyptian myth. A time when gods and men shared the earth. A time before memory. A time of Zep Tepi. 1. The Zep Tepi Enigma. Long before the pyramids pierced the sky. Before dynasties, pharaohs, or even writing, there was a memory. A fading echo carried through temple walls and sacred texts, whispered from one priest to another across centuries. The Egyptians called it Zep Tepi. The first time. It was not a metaphor. It was not poetry. It was a record. According to ancient Egyptian lore, Zep Tepi was an era when the gods themselves ruled Egypt. Not from the heavens, but on earth. Osiris was king. Isis his queen. Thoth, the divine scribe. Horus, the protector. And among them, strange names, Ta, Adam, Are, beings of immense power, knowledge, and presence. These gods did not rule symbolically. They built cities. They taught agriculture. They introduced law, order, medicine, and writing. And then they vanished. Some were slain, others ascended. And when they left, they passed their knowledge to the Shemsuhor, the followers of Horus, a mysterious race of semi-divine beings who are said to have ruled Egypt for thousands of years before the first human pharaoh ever wore a crown. It sounds like mythology. But what if it's not? Let's look at the timeline. Mainstream Egyptology tells us Egyptian civilization began around 3100 BC. But on the Turin King list, a papyrus held in the Egyptian Museum of Turin, there is a much older section. It describes kings who ruled before the unification of Egypt. Their reigns are measured not in decades, but in thousands of years. Then there's the Palermo stone, one of the oldest known Egyptian records. It also references pre-dynastic rulers, some of whom reigned for 7,000 to 20,000 years. One name even appears in both, Thoth, the god of wisdom and time. Even Manetho, the Egyptian priest whose writings form the backbone of our dynastic history, describes a time when the gods ruled Egypt for 36,000 years. After them came the demigods, and only then came the pharaohs. Are these exaggerated records? Or faded truths? Let's not forget what we saw in Series 2. The Great Pyramid, aligned with the stars, built with impossible precision, and older than any confirmed tomb, contains no inscription, no builder's name. It may not fit the timeline of the Old Kingdom. But what if it doesn't belong in that timeline at all? What if it's a survivor from Zep Tepi? Archaeological anomalies continue to emerge, structures beneath the Sphinx, erosion patterns that suggest it stood during heavy rains over 10,000 years ago, long before the Sahara became desert. Satellite scans reveal buried chambers, unknown passages, silent, sealed, untouched. Are we standing on top of the first time, without knowing it? If Zep Tepi truly happened, we must also ask, who were these gods? Were they real beings? Perhaps a lost advanced civilization destroyed by cataclysm? Survivors of Atlantis, as some propose? Or were they something otherworldly? Because across cultures, we find the same story repeated. The Sumerians wrote of the Anunnaki, sky beings who descended and taught humanity. The Hindus speak of Devas and flying Vimanas in the ancient Vedas. The Greeks had Titans and Olympians. The Maya had Kukulkan, the feathered serpent from the stars. It's as if every great civilization remembers a time before man was alone. Maybe that's what Zep Tepi really is. A universal memory of a shared past. A whisper from the edge of prehistory, carried down through bloodlines, rituals, and stone. Not fiction, but fractured truth. In the temples of Abydos and Dendera, ancient carvings show strange objects, disc-like shapes, tube-like devices, and what appear to be flying craft. Scholars call them coincidences, misinterpretations. But once you accept that Zep Tepi might have been real, you begin to see them differently. What if Egypt's greatest secret is not how much they built, but how much they remembered? What if their gods were not imagined, but witnessed? And what if the legacy of Zep Tepi is not yet finished? In our next episode, we investigate the Shemsuhor, those mysterious beings said to bridge the gap between gods and men. They ruled quietly, in the shadows, building the foundation of what Egypt would become. Some say they were astronomers. Some say priests. Others say they never left. 2. The Shemsuhor, Egypt's hidden dynasty. In the wake of Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods walked among men, the world began to change. The earth trembled. Floods rose. The golden age of divine rule faded like the stars at dawn. But the memory of that time did not disappear. Instead, it was carried forward by a mysterious group known only as the Shemsuhor. The followers of Horus. You won't hear their names in modern textbooks. They do not appear in school curriculums. Yet they are mentioned again and again in the ancient records, as rulers, architects, and guardians who spanned the twilight between gods and men. So who were they? According to the ancient king lists, like the Turin Papyrus and the writings of Manetho, the Shemsuhor ruled Egypt not for decades, but for thousands of years, before the first human dynasties began. They are said to have taken over after the gods departed, acting as stewards of divine knowledge, preserving the teachings of Zep-Tepi in secret. But they were not ordinary humans. Some sources describe them as tall, with elongated skulls and strange eyes. Others say they lived unnaturally long lives, moving across the land like shadows of the past. In some inscriptions, they're seen holding staffs of power, walking beside beings we consider gods, not as servants, but as equals. In the Temple of Abydos, an inscription lists kings of pre-dynastic times, and among them are names unrecognizable, untranslatable. One term recurs: Shemsahor. In this context, not just a title, but a lineage. A dynasty lost in time, yet central to everything that followed. Let's follow their trail. In Saqqara, under the step pyramid of Djoser, strange underground chambers lie hidden, some still unexplored. Their design suggests a knowledge of harmonic resonance and astronomical alignment far beyond the era they're dated to. Could these be the work of the Shemsahor? Even the Sphinx bears their mark. Carved from a single bedrock mass, its erosion suggests it predates dynastic Egypt by thousands of years, possibly reaching back to the end of the last ice age. But if the Sphinx is that old, who carved it? Many alternative researchers believe it was the Shemsahor, acting as keepers of memory, preserving the image of Horus in stone before the desert claimed it. There's more. Legends across Egypt speak of beings who came from the stars, brought tools of light, and taught the early people how to align their temples to celestial cycles. They taught how to speak the language of geometry, how to build using sacred ratios, how to connect sky to stone. Does that sound like primitive desert dwellers? Or like the inheritors of something much older? Some believe the Shemsahor were survivors of a cataclysm, descendants of an advanced civilization destroyed by floods, meteors, or Earth's shifting axis. Others say they were hybrid beings, part human, part something else, seated to preserve knowledge until the world was ready again. There's even a theory that they never fully vanished, that their bloodlines continued, hidden among the priesthood, in mystery schools, in secret societies that would later appear in Greece, Rome, even Renaissance Europe. That they were the origin of Hermeticism, of sacred geometry, and of whispers passed down in alchemical texts. But one thing is certain. The Shemsahor were not forgotten by the ancient Egyptians. In fact, they were revered. The earliest pharaohs, Menes, Narmer, Djoser, did not claim to be inventors of civilization. They claimed to be heirs. They referenced the ways of the ancestors, the mysteries of the first ones. Even the Book of the Dead speaks of returning to the time when Horus ruled, not as a god, but as a king of earth. If the gods were gone, and the Shemsahor were left behind, then who gave them their charge? And more importantly, what were they preparing for? Because some texts hint that the knowledge they guarded wasn't just historical or scientific, but prophetic. That they knew of cycles, of coming floods, of future awakenings. That the pyramids, the temples, the alignments, were not just records, but clocks, ticking slowly towards something we haven't yet understood. Something still to come. 3. The soul engines, temples built to transmit the Ka. The temples of Egypt are not quiet places. Even in ruin, they whisper. Not with voices, but with vibration. With geometry. With presence. For thousands of years, we've seen them as houses of worship, places to pray, to sacrifice, to speak with gods. But what if their true purpose was far stranger? What if these sacred spaces were machines? Not machines of metal and gears, but of energy and spirit. Designed not to worship the divine, but to channel it. This is where we meet the concept of the Ka. In ancient Egyptian belief, a human being was not just body and soul, but a system of spiritual layers. Among these, the Ka was vital. It was the life force, the spiritual double, the invisible energy that animated a person. When you died, your Ka didn't vanish. It could live on. It could travel. It could return. But only if properly guided and properly amplified. This is where temples come in. Each major temple in Egypt, from Karnak to Luxor, Edfu to Dendera, was built not merely as a monument, but as a resonator. Their proportions were carefully calculated. The dimensions of halls, the width of columns, even the shape of the stone blocks, all appear to follow harmonic principles. Acoustic studies in places like the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid and the Hypostyle Hall of Karnak reveal that certain frequencies resonate perfectly, creating standing waves that linger, amplify, and hum through stone. Coincidence? Or calibration? Could these structures have been designed to generate and focus spiritual energy? Let's go deeper. The Egyptian word for temple was Pernedjer, the house of the god. But Netjer doesn't mean God in the Western sense. It means force, principle, vibration. So a temple wasn't just a church, it was a vessel to hold and transmit something unseen. The Ka, then, wasn't simply honored there. It was activated. During temple rituals, priests would chant specific tones, intoned syllables that modern researchers now link to solfeggio frequencies. These chants, bouncing off polished limestone and granite walls, would vibrate the space. Combine that with incense, sacred geometry, and astronomical timing, and you had an environment optimized for spiritual transformation. The Ka wasn't just surviving. It was moving from one plane to another. And the priests? They weren't just worshippers. They were engineers of spirit. This changes everything. Take Luxor Temple, for example. Unlike most temples, it isn't aligned to the sun or cardinal points, but to Sirius, the star of resurrection. Its axis curves, just slightly, as if to track celestial motion. And at its core lies a sanctum where no statue was placed, only silence. Or Dendera Temple, where a hidden crypt shows strange reliefs, figures holding what look like serpent-shaped energy bulbs connected to a source. The so-called Dendera light. Is it symbolism? Or a record of spiritual electric interaction? Then there's the phenomenon of energy hotspots. Places in temples where visitors feel sudden pressure, heat, or vibration. Sensitive people report altered states. Ancient priests may have stood in these exact places, not to perform rituals for the gods, but to enter states of contact with the unseen. The Ka could be gathered, focused, and sent through sound, stone, and silence. Perhaps this is why the dead were brought to the temples even after death, why mummies were reactivated, not just buried. The funerary texts speak of rituals to ignite the Ka, to open the mouth, to allow the spirit to speak, move, and remember. The body was not just embalmed, it was tuned. And the temple was not a grave, it was a charging station for the afterlife. But what were the Egyptians trying to do with this technology of the soul? Some say it was about resurrection, returning the Ka to the stars. Others believe it was about preserving information, storing the essence of knowledge, of identity, in a way that would survive even the end of the world. Because unlike books, unlike scrolls, the Ka can travel. If encoded properly, it may even return. Maybe that's what the Shemsuhor were doing. Not building for now, but for a time when consciousness itself could be reborn through their sacred machines. And if temples are truly soul engines, then what were they powering? That's what we'll explore in Episode 4. The idea that memory, soul, and time itself could be stored beneath our feet. Next, we descend into the vaults of eternity, hidden chambers where ancient Egypt may have hidden the greatest secret of all. A library of spirit. 4. The vaults of eternity, where memory was buried alive. In the last episode, we learned that Egyptian temples were more than places of prayer. They were engines of spiritual energy, built to channel the Ka, the life force of the soul. But what if the Ka wasn't just meant to ascend? What if it was meant to be stored? Welcome to the forgotten world beneath Egypt. A world not of pharaohs and monuments, but of vaults, chambers, and silent memory. Across the sands of Egypt lie stories of buried halls, sealed crypts not marked by tombs or temples. Subterranean networks beneath Giza, Saqqara, and Abydos. Places so old, so sacred, that even the priests spoke of them only in whispers. Places they called the vaults of eternity. These were not burial sites. They were not treasure hoards. They were memory vaults, built to preserve not gold, but knowledge. Let's begin with Saqqara. Beneath the step pyramid of Djoser lies a vast labyrinth of tunnels, some over 5 kilometers in length. Many remain unexcavated. Some chambers, when opened, revealed empty sarcophagi, massive stone boxes with no sign of bodies. No writing. No decoration. Just silence. One chamber held a granite box so large, it couldn't have fit through the entrance, meaning the chamber was built around it. But why go through such effort, for a box that holds nothing? Unless the box wasn't meant to hold a body, but something else entirely. Now let's travel to Abydos. There, under the temple of Seti I, lies the Osirian, an underground structure made of granite blocks weighing up to 100 tons. Built with no mortar, perfectly aligned. It sits below the level of the Nile, flooded much of the year. And yet, it is one of the most precisely engineered sites in Egypt. No inscriptions. No tomb. Just energy. Even mainstream archaeologists admit. It looks far older than the temple above it. Then there's the greatest mystery of all, beneath the Sphinx. As early as the 1930s, researchers speculated about underground chambers beneath the Giza Plateau. In 1993, a seismographic survey revealed anomalies beneath the Sphinx's paws, voids, chambers, possibly man-made. Edgar Cayce, the American sleeping prophet, predicted decades earlier that beneath the Sphinx was a hall of records, a library of a lost civilization, sealed until the world was ready. Crazy? Until you realize. Egyptian myth already told us that such a hall existed. The House of Life, a legendary archive said to contain all sacred knowledge from Zep-Tepi. Not on papyrus. Not in books. But carved in stone memory, coded into frequency, light, and vibration. But what were they trying to preserve? If you were facing the end of an age, if you knew floods, war, or cosmic catastrophe were coming, what would you save? Not just language, not just astronomy, but consciousness itself. The Egyptians believed that memory was not merely personal. It was energetic, recorded in the Ka, stored in the bones of the earth, echoed in vibration. That places could remember, and so could objects. They believed a properly prepared chamber could hold not just thoughts, but a living imprint. What we might call a spiritual database. Some theories suggest that in these vaults, the ancient ones stored the memory of star origins, the maps of energy grids across Earth, the resonance codes for healing and transformation, and perhaps the Ka of entire bloodlines. There are even inscriptions, now partially erased, that speak of the Day of Reawakening, a time when the vaults would be opened, not by tomb raiders, but by those who could hear the frequencies again. The Egyptians may have seen themselves not just as people, but as carriers of memory. Their bodies were buried. Their souls ascended. But their Ka remained, anchored in sacred stone, waiting. Waiting for what? For us. Because here's the chilling question. What if the vaults were never meant to be discovered physically? What if they're encoded in the land, the stars, the temple designs, and even in us? What if we are the vaults? And when we walk through Luxor, Karnak, or beneath the Giza Plateau, it's not just exploration, it's activation. In the words of Thoth, as above, so below. As within, so without. Maybe that wasn't a metaphor. Maybe it was a map. 5. Echoes of the End, Egypt's Forgotten Warning. We began this series searching for the hidden hands behind Egypt's greatness. And we found myths that felt like memories. Temples that functioned as machines. Vaults that preserved not treasure, but truth. Now we stand at the edge of that truth. Because the deeper you look into Egypt's sacred knowledge, the more it starts to sound like something else entirely. A warning. The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with cycles. Not just lunar or solar, but cosmic cycles, great ages of time that rose and fell like tides. They believed history was not linear, but circular. That civilizations rise, peak, and collapse, over and over again. And each time, a few survivors carried memory forward. They called it the Eye of Time. A vision of repeated endings, some brought by water, others by fire, and some by forgetting. Many texts point to one cataclysm in particular, an age-ending event that wiped away the world that came before Egypt. Some say it was a flood. Others suggest a celestial disturbance, the passing of a rogue planet, a solar flare, or a shift in Earth's magnetic poles. Whatever it was, the ancients believed it would happen again. But this time, maybe we wouldn't be ready. Let's look at the Dendera zodiac, carved into the ceiling of the Hathor Temple. Unlike modern star maps, it depicts entire ages, not years. Scholars now believe it charts a 26,000-year cycle called the precession of the equinoxes, during which Earth's orientation to the stars gradually shifts. The last time we were aligned as we are today was just before the end of the last ice age, around 11,000 BC, when something ended. Egyptian texts refer to this period as the first death, the end of Zeb Tepi. And in those same texts, a pattern appears. Each age ends not randomly, but when humanity forgets itself. When we lose the balance between the heavens and the earth. When we trade spirit for power. And when we ignore the warnings written in stone. The temples, the pyramids, the vaults, they weren't just built for beauty or mystery. They were built to survive the end of an age. To outlast fire, flood, and ignorance. To speak across time. What are they saying? In Luxor Temple, one inscription speaks of a time when the stars will cry out, and the earth shall tremble again. The wise shall awaken, and the gates of memory will open. In the Book of Coming Forth by Day, often miscalled the Book of the Dead, we read, the soul that remembers the first time shall walk unburned through the fire of return. And at Giza, the Sphinx still gazes east, toward the rising constellation of Leo, where the sun will rise at the spring equinox once again. Just as it did 13,000 years ago. A full cycle. A cosmic reset. And we're nearing the end of that cycle, now. Could this be the real reason the ancients built so much to last? Not to preserve history, but to prepare for the next fall? Many ancient cultures speak of a future awakening, a time when those who carry ancient memory will begin to feel the call. Some say they'll find the vaults. Others believe the knowledge is already encoded in DNA, waiting to be activated. Perhaps the final message is not written in stone, but in us. A soul memory. An echo from Zeb Tepi. A feeling that this world has fallen before, and will rise again. If that's true, then maybe the greatest secret of Egypt is this. That the temples weren't just built for gods. They were built by those who remembered them. That the monuments weren't built to impress. They were built to warn. And that you, hearing this now, are not just a spectator. You are part of the cycle. You were always meant to hear the echo, to feel the tremble, to remember. Across the series, we followed echoes through time. From the mythical age of Zep-Tepi, to the shadowy rulers of the Shem-Sahor, to the temples that harness soul energy, and the silent vaults beneath our feet. What we uncovered was not a legend, but a message. Not a monument to the past, but a guide for the future. The ancient Egyptians didn't just preserve history. They preserved warning signs. They saw the world not in centuries, but in cycles, rising and falling like breath. They knew that knowledge, once forgotten, leads not to darkness, but to repetition. And they built monuments not to boast of power, but to speak across time. Now we ask, what if that time is now? What if we are not discovering ancient truths, but remembering them? The sands of Egypt may have buried cities, temples, and tombs, but they could not bury the call to awaken, to listen, to look deeper than stone. Because if Egypt left us anything, it wasn't just architecture. It was a chance to not make the same mistake twice. And maybe that's why we're drawn back to these ruins. Not to study the dead, but to recover something still alive, something waiting for us to return.